Iran attacks Israel.
Sirens going off in the center of Israel, in the south of Israel. So it appears to be a large-scale attack targeting multiple parts of the country.
Plus, the new Secretary General of NATO is on the job.
Let's not forget Ukraine is fighting a war of self-defense. And that means that Ukraine has the right to defend itself. And as we know, international law, and according to international law, this right does not end at the border.
U.S. vice presidential candidates face off in a debate, and a former president celebrates his 100th birthday. Today is Tuesday, October 1st, and this is VOA's Flashpoint.
Good evening, I'm Lori London with Steve Karish. Air raid sirens sounding across Israel as residents were ordered to remain close to bomb shelters as Iran launched missiles hours after a senior U.S. official said Tehran was preparing to imminently strike Israel. The orders to shelter in place were sent to Israelis' mobile phones and announced on national television. TV stations reported sirens in parts of Jerusalem as well as central Israel. Steve spoke with our colleague Michael Lippin for the latest on this developing situation as tensions continue to escalate in the region to even more dangerous levels.
So the latest information is that the Israeli military has made a statement to the nation saying that an Iranian attack on the country had begun. And around about the same time, I was listening to the I-24 news channel that is an Israeli network, and you could hear sirens going off all over the country. The network was talking about sirens going off in the center of Israel, in the south of Israel. So it appears to be a large-scale attack targeting multiple parts of the country.
Presumably this is a missile attack.
It appears to be a missile attack. Iran has a variety of weapons in its arsenal. Ballistic missiles, which fly very quickly, is my understanding, from Iran to Israel. They could get there within a matter of minutes. Iran has other weapons, like drones, for example, that take a longer amount of time to travel that distance. We saw in April Iran fire hundreds of drones and cruise missiles toward Israel, and those took some time to make it that very large distance from Iran to Israel. So what Iran fired today, it seems as if those projectiles traveled much faster because there wasn't much advance warning.
What do we know about Iran's calculation as to why now?
That is a great question. One thing that I've read from a variety of Iran watchers today is that the Iranian Supreme Leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, he has been out of the public eye since last Friday when Israel carried out the strike that eliminated the Hezbollah chief, Hassan Nasrallah. And people have been wondering, where is Khamenei? What is he going to do? The Iranian state media have said that the Supreme Leader will make a public announcement. He will make a public appearance this Friday, leading Friday prayers in the capital Tehran, which is something rather unusual, that he himself would lead Friday prayers. And there are some theories that he would want to make a big announcement to his people this Friday. So if Iran were going to carry out some kind of retaliation against Israel for Israel eliminating another head of this axis of resistance, it would have between now and Friday. The Supreme Leader would have between now and Friday to show his people some kind of accomplishment. So that's just one theory about why Iran might be acting now.
And what does the incursion into Lebanon, Israel's incursion into Lebanon, have to do with any of this?
Another tough question to answer. Israel and Hezbollah are now engaged in a very fierce battle. Hezbollah has been rather wounded from all of the Israeli operations in recent days and the last 2 weeks. There were other rocket strikes on Israel today, earlier today, from Lebanon. So Hezbollah appears to be using more of its missile arsenal to strike at Israel. And now you have the Iranian government. Iran itself is the patron of Hezbollah, also attacking Israel on the same day. So they're definitely working in tandem. How much coordination there might be between Hezbollah and Iran itself in attacking Israel, it's not clear. But we do know that they work very closely together.
We've been hearing for a long time now that Israel, the U.S., other players in the region do not want a larger regional war. And day by day, week by week, it looks like that larger regional war is more and more a reality. Has the time for diplomacy passed?
I think you would find, even at this rather perilous moment for the region, that the Western powers, the United States, its European allies, would not want to give up on diplomacy because, as you rightly say, they have repeatedly been stressing a desire for a diplomatic solution to all of this. Yet, at the same time, the conflict between Israel and Iran's axis of resistance has been ratcheting up. And it appears evident now that those calls for diplomacy from the West have failed to prevent this latest escalation with another Iranian strike directly from Iranian territory on Israel. Only the second time that's happened, and the first time was in April. Where the conflict goes from here, it's not clear. The United States warned of severe consequences today for Iran if it carried out the strike that is just begun. So it's anyone's guess as to how severe that retaliation or that response could be from Israel, from the U.S. It's all a matter of having to wait and see, but it's certainly a very dramatic escalation.
VOA's Michael Lippin. Michael, thank you for your time. Thank you for reporting on what is no doubt a very busy day for you.
Thank you.
Linda Gradstein in Jerusalem tells us that earlier, as soon as the warnings of an imminent attack came out, the Israeli government was sending guidelines for citizens to follow.
It said that not only in the north of Israel, but in the center and even in Jerusalem, there are no gatherings outside allowed of more than 30 people and inside of more than 300 people. This comes a day before the Jewish holiday of Rosh Hashanah, where people go to synagogue. So I'm not sure exactly what that's going to mean for people going to synagogue. There was supposed to be a huge outdoor event of thousands saying special pre-Rosh Hashanah prayers at the Western Wall. That was canceled. And the Israeli prime minister just told people to please follow the guidelines. This is not the first time. In April, Iran sent something like 300 ballistic missiles and drones at Israel, most of which were shot down by a U.S.-led coalition before they even reached Israeli airspace. So,
are people heeding the warning? I imagine things are pretty tense there, given the circumstances today and what's been happening over the weeks and weeks.
Yes, people are tense. I don't think people are hysterical. I mean, every Israeli, the newer buildings all have a bomb shelter actually as one of the rooms in each apartment, and the older buildings have a communal bomb shelter in the basement. The fact is that it's coming the day before the holiday. How that might affect it's actually the beginning of a whole month of holidays, especially Rosh Hashanah, the Jewish New Year, and then 10 days later, Yom Kippur is the most solemn day of the year, and people spend most of that day praying and fasting.
And we are hearing that the Israeli military has started raids, a cross-border invasion that they say is a limited operation in southern Lebanon, telling people there, though, to, leave their homes. And yet Hezbollah is denying this is happening.
The Israeli army has released footage of the troops operating in South Lebanon. They say that they have hit something like, 1,000 Hezbollah targets, and they have told the residents to leave, most of whom had already left anyway, and saying that any cars traveling in South Lebanon would be seen as potential enemies and could be hit. Israel called up one reserve brigade and now has just called up another 4. So it's not clear if that's just sort of preventative or Israel is planning a wider operation. But at least now what they've been saying is there's a lot of Hezbollah infrastructure that was very close to the Israeli border. The army says that Hezbollah was planning an attack similar to what Hamas did a year ago on October 7th when thousands of troops just kind of surged into Israel, and that Hezbollah was planning something similar. Israel has sent messages to the people of Lebanon saying that they don't have any problem with the people of Lebanon and that all Israel wants is for its citizens, its 63,000 people who have been evacuated now for almost a year to be able to go back to their homes in northern Israel.
But it sounds like Hezbollah, however weakened it may be, they're still launching rockets from what we hear.
They are still launching rockets. Earlier today, it was at a slower pace than had been in the past few days. So they are still able to launch rockets. And even though Hezbollah has suffered a serious blow, Israeli analysts say that Hezbollah still has thousands of fighters, still has tens of thousands of rockets, and could present a serious threat to Israel. The sense, though, is that Hezbollah is kind of reeling from the last 2 weeks, the series of Israeli strikes, the assassination of Hassan Nasrallah, and that there was a sense in Israel that this is the time and the operation to really, at the time, to really try to hit Hezbollah and make it so that it can't threaten Israel anymore. At the same time, it comes after Israel's been sort of mired in a war in Gaza for a year since October 7th. More than 40,000 Palestinians, both fighters and many civilians, have been killed. Huge swaths of Gaza have been destroyed. I'm not sure if the army has the energy for another long war. My sense is it's going to be a more limited incursion.
Linda Gradstein coming to us from Jerusalem. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Lori.
On his first day on the job, the new NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte said in a press conference Tuesday that the situation on Ukraine's battlefield is difficult. But he added that Russia's advances come at a very high cost and that Ukraine's right to self-defense does not end at the border. He also used the opportunity to send a warning of sorts to China amid an increase in tension in the Pacific and growing economic competition between China and NATO countries. Rutte called China out for supporting Moscow's invasion and warned of consequences.
Through its support for Russia's military industry, China has become a decisive enabler of Russia's war in Ukraine. China cannot continue to fuel the largest conflict in Europe since the Second World War without this impacting its interests and reputation.
NATO officials and diplomats expect Rutte to maintain Jens Stoltenberg's priorities, rallying support for Ukraine, pushing NATO countries to spend more on defense, and keep the U.S. engaged in European security.
As we've just heard, Mark Rutte says he'll continue NATO's support of Ukraine now that he's Secretary General. This message was well received in Kyiv, and that's where we catch up with our correspondent, Anna Chernikova, for an update.
Former Prime Minister of the Netherlands, Mark Rutte, officially took over as NATO Secretary General from his predecessor Jens Stoltenberg on Tuesday. In Ukraine, Rutte has a strong favorable reputation for his unwavering support for Ukraine and for doing a lot as the Prime Minister of the Netherlands for the transfer of F-16 fighter jets to Ukraine. He reiterated this commitment earlier on Tuesday.
Let's not forget, Ukraine is fighting a war of self-defense. And that means that Ukraine has the right to defend itself. And as we know, international law, and according to international law, this right does not end at the border. So that means that supporting Ukraine's right to self-defense means that it is also possible for them to strike legitimate targets on the aggressor's territory.
He said that he will continue to fulfill NATO's obligations to Ukraine, in particular the irreversibility of its path to joining NATO, and that Ukraine will be one of his priorities as the new head of the alliance.
My second priority is to step up our support for Ukraine and bring it ever closer to NATO. Because there can be no lasting security in Europe without a strong, independent Ukraine. I know from personal experience with the downing of flight MH17 in 2014, how conflict in Ukraine is not contained to the front lines. So we must do our part.
Also, October 1st marks Defenders' Day in Ukraine. It is a solemn day for remembering those who gave their lives protecting Ukraine and thanking those who continue their service and fight for country's independence and sovereignty. Meanwhile, Russian forces conducted another massive drone attack across Ukraine and heavy shelling of Kherson and Zaporizhia. As a result of the attack on the central marketplace in Kherson, at least 7 people were killed and 3 injured. In Zaporizhia, at least 1 person was killed and 6 injured after a Russian attack on an industrial facility and 5 residential buildings. Ukrainian authorities confirmed that the fighting is ongoing in Vuhledar in the Donetsk region, which was one of the main targets for the Russian forces in the past months. 107 residents remain in the settlement. All children have been evacuated. Anna Chernikova, VOA News, Kyiv.
You're listening to Flashpoint from the Voice of America. I'm Steve Karish with Lori London in Washington. We'll take a look ahead to the vice presidential debate Tuesday night in New York. That's coming up shortly.
Up first, though, a tragedy in Thailand. A school bus carrying students and their teachers on a field trip caught fire on the outskirts of the capital of Bangkok. We caught up with correspondent Tommy Walker, who was on scene.
The bus was, by that time, heavily charred, smouldering, if you like. A lot of authorities and medic teams and firemen on the ground and really just trying to gain access to this bus. The bus had sort of been parked up on the side of this highway just outside of Bangkok, and they were just trying to remove bodies on the bus, really. So it was really distressing scenes. The bus was heavily charred, and yeah, at that point it was an operation to remove anyone who was left on the bus.
Did you get any sense of whether there were any survivors?
What the authorities told me, what the police told me, is that there were actually 23 people still on the bus, and that was 20 children and 3 adults, 3 teachers. In recent minutes, authorities have said that them 23 people had been killed, that they died because of the crash or because of the fire. So at that point, it was about removing these bodies.
Do they know what might have happened?
So some buses in Thailand like this, a lot of them are powered by compressed natural gas. Now, reports say that the bus veered into another lane and clipped another car. At some point, whether before or afterwards, its tyre burst and it continued to sort of drive along until the fire began. So it seems that there's been multiple causes for this fire, whether it's the burst tyre or the crash with the car. But that's what we know so far.
Do you know if they were able to save anyone or if anyone did come out alive?
Yes, so 19 people actually escaped the fire when it first started, and that was 16 children and 3 teachers. But the remaining people on board, which now we know was 23, were initially unaccounted for. And then later the authorities found the 23 bodies all on board, and all of them had perished. So 19 had survived, but 23 hadn't.
And the children themselves, were they young grade school children?
Between, what reports say, between 6 to 15-year-old. So some were grade school and some were teenagers. It's a terrible tragedy to have, and it's such a dark day for Thailand. Thailand's got one of the world's worst safety records for road accidents. So it's not uncommon for buses to get into accidents. It's just the sheer devastation of this one. And given the fact that 20 plus, or at least 20 kids have died, and there are other kids remaining in hospital, there are other children still in hospital in intensive care, it just highlights the devastation of what can happen in such a fiery road crash. And another thing to report is that the bus driver fled the scene, according to reports. And reports also say that an arrest warrant has been made for him. So we're not sure where he is. But for whatever's happened, it's been a tragic loss of life.
Correspondent Tommy Walker reporting to us from just outside of Bangkok. Thank you so much for taking the time to fill us in on this horrible story.
Okay, thanks, Laurie.
That was Bangkok-based reporter Tommy Walker.
A potential economic disaster is brewing in the U.S. Dock workers on the East and Gulf coasts began a strike early on Tuesday. It's their first large-scale stoppage in nearly 50 years. The strike halts the flow of about half the nation's ocean shipping after negotiations for a new labor contract broke down over wages. The strike blocks everything from food to automobile shipments through dozens of ports in a disruption that could cost the economy billions of dollars each day. And in the southeastern United States, the full extent of the damage and destruction from Hurricane Helene is just becoming apparent. The mountains of western North Carolina were particularly hard hit with power outages and flooding. Whole towns are inundated, bridges washed away, homes and businesses gone. Hundreds of people are still missing, and residents are struggling with a lack of basic services. More than 100 deaths across a half-dozen states have been attributed to the powerful storm that first slammed into Florida's Big Bend region late Thursday before cutting a destructive path through Georgia and into the Carolinas.
The destruction in North Carolina and other states has already become a political issue. Former President Donald Trump falsely claimed that President Biden refused to help areas affected by the storm, and many Democrats have been quick to point out that some Republicans voted against the government spending bill last week that kept the government and federal relief agencies funded and able to work when needed. Tuesday night in New York, there's another highly political event. The vice presidential candidates, J.D. Vance and Tim Walz, meet for their first and only debate. VOA correspondent Scott Stearns looks at what we can expect.
Tim Walz and J.D. Vance will debate on television for 90 minutes Tuesday, with 2 moderators and no live audience. Vance is a U.S. Senator from the Midwest state of Ohio who's running with Donald Trump. He says the debate is a chance to show how Republicans will improve the economy and secure the border.
It's an opportunity for me to get to tell the American people how I think we can make their lives better and how Donald Trump's policies can make them more prosperous, can make the world more peaceful, and can secure that southern border. If we do those things, we're going to win.
Walz is governor of the Midwest state of Minnesota and is running with Kamala Harris. He says Democrats are looking out for working-class Americans, unlike his opponent.
Like all regular people I grew up with in the heartland, J.D. studied at Yale, had his career funded by Silicon Valley billionaires, and then wrote a bestseller trashing that community. Come on! That's not what middle America is. And I gotta tell you, I can't wait to debate the guy.
Vance is a one-time Trump critic who won the former president's endorsement for his Senate run. Vance has since aligned himself with Trump's America First approach.
Now, our enemies and a lot of Democrats call us populists, like it's something of an insult. But if being a populist means being on the side of working people rather than the powerful elites who hollowed out our middle class and sent us into stupid foreign wars, then sign me up.
Vance recently told European leaders they need to pay more to help Ukraine fight off the Russian invasion. Walz says Vance and Trump mean to relinquish U.S. leadership.
When Republicans used to talk about freedom, many of them actually meant it. They weren't going to turn their backs on our allies. They weren't going to leave Ukraine to themselves.
Tuesday's matchup is the last scheduled debate before the November 5th election, with early voting already underway in some states. Scott Stearns, VOA News.
And finally today, a happy occasion. Former President Jimmy Carter celebrates his 100th birthday on Tuesday. He's lived longer than any U.S. president in history. Carter is known for his decades of humanitarian work, promoting human rights and alleviating poverty in countries around the world, which earned him the Nobel Peace Prize in 2002.
And that's all for today's program. There's more VOA coverage 24 hours a day on our website, voanews.com, and across our social media platforms. On behalf of Steve Karish and all of us here at VOA, thank you so much for listening. Until tomorrow, I'm Lori London.
For deeper dives and expert analysis, listen to VOA Podcasts. Issues in the News explores the biggest stories every weekend, while International Edition keeps you informed every weekday. Plus, with the 5-minute newscast at the top of every hour, you're always up to date.